Okay, the next item of business is a debate on motion 16170 in the name of Miles Briggs on delivering school environments where it is safe for pupils to learn and teachers to teach. To invite members wishing to participate to press the request to speak buttons. I would remind members that we are very tight for time across this debate and the next one, and I call on Miles Briggs to speak to and move the motion up to 7 minutes. Mr.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Last night I met with teachers here in Edinburgh at an event organised by Edinburgh EIS branch to hear first-hand the pressures teachers here in the capital are facing in our classrooms. They spoke of emergency and crisis levels of violence and abuse, with stories of teachers going off on sick leave due to stress, but also needing to go to A&E for broken bones following incidents of violence in their schools. Deputy Presiding Officer, attacks on teachers and pupils in our schools are totally unacceptable and must stop. Now, I believe there is clearly cross-party concern, and I hope consensus, for more action and leadership to address the ongoing increase in cases of violence against pupils and our teachers. The need for action to help restore positive learning environments in which all young people and teachers are safe to learn and teach in a respected and supported setting. It's a pressing issue and should be the #1 priority, I believe, for ministers. Scottish Conservatives have led the debate around school discipline. In March last year, we brought forward a debate on ending violence in schools, and as the motion states today, we welcome the work which this has led ministers to take forward. But we need to be honest. This is not delivering the change we need to see in our classrooms and schools, and it is not delivering at any pace. Unions have warned that there has been a failure of local authorities and Education Scotland to do anything significant to help to embed the National Action Plan on relationships and behaviours in schools. Teachers, pupils and parents are crying out for ministers to take action and to provide the leadership to turn this situation around. So today's debate therefore presents, I hope, an opportunity for what I believe needs to be a reset around our school environment. Many schools can be and are great learning environments for our young people and teachers and the wider community. However, what is concerning in too many cases and too many schools, we see the school environment now becoming toxic and ones where students and teachers experience stress, bullying and other negative behaviours that are impacting on their mental health and well-being and very ability to learn. Now, ministers have acknowledged the rise in the incidents of violence and abuse in our schools and the fact that in many cases these are actually going unreported. That's why Scottish Conservatives want to see common sense policies brought back to our classrooms and schools. That's why we're calling for action from ministers today to bring forward a set of national policies to help deliver the positive changes we all want to see, to help restore our schools to safe and welcoming learning spaces. Key question teachers raised with me last night is why ministers have not commissioned any work to understand why children are exhibiting such negative behaviours and why schools are not being given the support they need to increasingly address these problematic issues. Above all, teachers want ministers to be clear that they will support them in saying that violence in our schools must end and pupils and parents must be responsible for their actions. That's why I'm calling on ministers to set a clear national policy on what we should expect in every school. And it's clear that is the direction teachers want to see. So that includes a ban on mobile phones in the classroom, full stop. That also includes a return to single-sex toilets and accessible toilets in all our schools. And it also includes the commissioning of a full independent review of the recording of data into incidents of attacks and violence against school staff. We also want to see clear guidance and support for teachers. We need to see the restoration of a situation where poor behaviour in our classrooms has consequences. And the majority of our well-behaved pupils in Scotland cannot continue to see their education negatively impacted. Above all, SNP ministers need to finally empower teachers to be able to take action against disruptive pupils and know that ministers have their back. Deputy Presiding Officer, yesterday I heard a new term teachers are using. The term is lappers, because increasingly pupils are turning up at school simply walking around the school and running around the corridors. Presiding Officer, the situation we see in our schools will only get worse if we do not see clear and robust response from ministers. We've called for that. They said they'd deliver it, but we haven't seen action. So it's totally unacceptable that we see more and more pupils and teachers now fearing going to school each day. We need to see an end to the acts of physical and verbal abuse against them. SNP ministers to date have failed to put in place the measures that would allow teachers to act against those responsible for violence and threats in our schools. We need to acknowledge that in recent years the school environment has changed, and we need to see clear national policies put in place to deliver teachers and parents and make sure we know what they can accept. Yes.
John Mason.
I thank the member for giving way. He talks about national policies, but have teachers and head teachers not been given the power to deal with mobile phones? And is that not better at a local level?
Miles Briggs.
So I think there's a huge difference between the guidance which ministers say councils can develop and take forward to a national policy. A national policy to say that we think and believe that mobile phones shouldn't be in classrooms rather than leaving it to individual schools. And we know the broad amount of evidence around that. To touch upon, for example, social media, which I think is important. The debate we have seen in Australia is important around the negative impact social media is having on our young people's mental health. That is why we also call in the motion for ministers to undertake a review in Scotland of this and look towards actually a potential Scottish ban in this area. I think we need to look towards the toxic environment our young people are living in and how we can change that. To conclude, Deputy Presiding Officer, schools must be a safe place for pupils to learn and teachers to teach. That simply isn't the case right now and will only get worse if SNP ministers do not get a grip of this situation. I am clear, and will be clear to any teacher watching, Scottish Conservatives support our teachers 100% in demanding fresh action to restore discipline in our schools. This must be the #1 priority for SNP ministers. They must be judged over the next year on their actions, and we will continue to press the government for that action. And I move the motion in my name. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Briggs. I now call on Natalie Dawn-Innes to speak to and move Amendment 16170.3. Minister, up to 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I am grateful to the Scottish Conservatives for bringing forward this afternoon's debate. I am keen to speak to the measures included in the Conservatives' motion in relation to my own ministerial responsibilities. The Cabinet Secretary will close today's debate and focus on schools-specific actions. Firstly, the motion references early learning and childcare provision, with the member referring to disparity of provision, and I would respectfully challenge this point. The Scottish Government continues to invest around £1 billion per year in delivering 1140 hours of funded ELC to all eligible children. Scotland is the only part of the UK to already offer 1140 hours a year of funded ELC to all 3- and 4-year-olds and eligible 2-year-olds, regardless of their parents' working status, and families across Scotland have been benefiting from this since 2021. However, I do recognise there are pressures faced... Yes, I will.
Miles Briggs.
To say she takes umbrage with disparity, I think probably every single member in this Parliament will have written to government ministers to say that people can't get the nursery choices they want. So where is there an issue when we highlight disparity, which clearly exists across our country?
Minister.
I'm going to come on to speak to some of the challenges, but what I would say, in one of the most recent surveys that were taken in relation to ELC, 97% of parents were satisfied with the quality of ELC that they were receiving. I do recognise there are challenges. I've spoken to the Chamber before about issues with inconsistencies in rates and other matters, and that's something that I'm continuing to work on. I equally recognise there are pressures facing ELC providers in Scotland in relation to the £5 million burden arising from the UK Government's employer national insurance contribution rise. And in terms of flexibility of provision, we also know that there are differing models of delivery of ELC in local authorities, and that's why we will continue to work with local government and sector partners to ensure the 1140 offer meets families' needs. Turning to the measures in the member's motion relating to factors influencing behaviour and engagement, I have to challenge the member's characterisation of schools and of our children. And oftentimes I think we need to look a bit deeper at why a child or young person might act in a certain way. Respondents to the Scottish Government's Behaviour in Scottish Schools research from November 23 highlighted societal factors such as poverty and deprivation, challenges associated with home and family life such as trauma and adverse childhood experiences as the root causes of disruptive behaviour. So we must strike a balance of in-school approaches to promoting positive behaviour alongside the external factors which might influence behaviour. And that's why I am committed to whole family wellbeing, prioritising services which help families to thrive and to stay together and avoid crisis points, which might later impact on a child or young person's school experience. Can I get the time back, Presiding Officer?
Not really.
Furthermore, my work on the Care and Justice Act means I take the members' reference in their motion to support for children and young people impacted by violence very seriously, and I was happy to work with members across this chamber to strengthen provisions within that Act. And further improvements remain a shared priority across government. The First Minister's Cross-Party Youth Justice Summit last week involved the Education Secretary, Justice Secretary, Minister for Victims and Community Safety, members across this chamber, youth justice organisations and young people who have been impacted by violence. And I was struck by comments from Jimmy Paul, head of the Scottish Violence Reduction Unit, who said there was a real commitment to reducing violence in Scotland and the issue was not politicised. It was a step in the right direction to tackling violence in Scotland, the start of the conversation, and it will look at the root causes and the drivers of violence, not just the act itself. Everybody in the room, from experts, young people and politicians, were on the same page. And it's in this spirit that we should go forward as a parliament together. We owe it to our young people not to use incidents of youth violence as political footballs. Now, Scotland's approach to confronting and correcting youth offending is effective and proven. Scotland needs to stay alert to emerging issues and to respond on the basis of evidence. That's how we minimise future victims and how we turn around young lives. Now, across this chamber, we are committed to ensuring our children and young people are free to grow up safe and nurtured. They should be protected from harms and harassment in their day-to-day lives, and that includes online. When browsing the internet, children can be exposed to cyberbullying, violent content, sexualised material and hate speech, including messages that incite violence or encourage toxic masculinity. Exposure to such content is putting our children at risk. And that's why I'm pleased to inform Parliament today that the First Minister has asked me to work with the Minister for Victims and Community Safety to create a new task force to identify what more can be done within the limits of devolution to protect children and young people from online harms. I think the reaction from the Conservative benches is appalling, actually. Today, the First Minister has also written to the UK Government to voice his support for joint working between our governments to improve online safety, and I sincerely hope that members across this chamber support this endeavour. Presiding Officer, it will take all of us, Government, Parliament, local authorities, agencies, schools, teachers and organisations to work together. I hope today's debate provides an opportunity to explore what more can be done collectively. I move the amendment in my name.
Thank you, Minister. I now call on Pam Duncan-Glancy to speak to and move Amendment 16170.2. Up to 4 minutes. Ms Duncan-Glancy.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and thank you to Miles Briggs for bringing this debate. I move the amendment in my name and I refer members to my register of interest. This issue is one we've returned to many times, yet the situation persists. NAS UWT have said that it leads teachers fearing for their safety, and a situation the GMB have called a national emergency, and so a focus on it today is crucial. And we welcome the publication of the Joint National Action Plan, echo calls of course for ministers to bring forward an update, and urge the Government to review the reporting and publication of data on this. We also welcome the mobile phone guidance, but more is needed, including on the impact of phones and social media, and that impact has on violence against women and girls. And I look forward to hearing a bit more about what that task force is. But we need more than just task force. We need action in schools and across communities. This issue that we are discussing today is far wider than all of this. We can't address it without also considering the workforce and the need for strong public services around young people. The other motions and amendments don't include this detail, and so I want to set out why I believe it is crucial. Cases of violence against pupils and staff and disruption in schools have escalated, and they are unacceptable. And worryingly, it looks like the lowest paid staff, women and girls, face the brunt of it, with GMB data suggesting that women workers are more often subject to incidents involving violence, and Time for Inclusive Education focus groups hearing from girls that misogyny, homophobia and racism are, and I quote, rife. Body shaming is common, rape jokes are minimised, and some girls do not want to eat in school due to sexualised comments being made by boys. Other girls don't even want to go to school at all, and all of this, of course, is affecting their mental health and their attention span. They've all indicated what MSYPs backed up this morning in committee, that social media can be an unsafe place, with content from popular figures, memes and videos normalising misogyny, anti-LGBT prejudice, racism and violence. Young people told the committee this morning that they want more support at school on this, and I'd encourage the Minister and the Cabinet Secretary to look at the Mind Your Time campaign as a start. I'd also urge the Cabinet Secretary to consider this in the context of the growing body of evidence that highlights the role of phones in this, and the evidence suggesting that overexposure to social media can influence attitudes, as well as result in people experiencing limited concentration, isolation and poor mental health. But what young people also said this morning was that as we discuss violence and the impact of it, we also have to consider the wider context, which our motion seeks to do, our amendment rather, seeks to do. Presiding Officer, without addressing the systemic and structural issues facing schools, classrooms will continue to be like pressure cookers with overworked staff and unsupported pupils. The EIS have said that teachers are working on average 11 hours extra per week unpaid, and they're still waiting on reduced contact time. We cannot address violence in schools in isolation from these issues. That's why we urgently need the Government to publish the comprehensive workforce plan that will address gaps in the teaching and school staff workforce that this Parliament voted for last May. Will I get my time back, Deputy Presiding Officer? I'm sorry, I'm not able to take the intervention. The Government must also address long waits and gaps in the provision of key public services like CAMHS, educational psychology and speech and language therapy. Nearly 1 in 6 children and young people who needed treatment waited more than 4 months for help. There's also growing prevalence of communication needs among children, with 6,000 waiting for speech and language therapy and 53% of those waiting more than 18 weeks. We have to address all of this if we're serious about the school environment, and that means finding ways to support joint working between education and NHS so that things like speech and language therapy are positioned closer to education services and to the child. All of this can have a detrimental impact on the school environment, and MSYP echoed this, saying this morning, "We've faced years of real terms cuts to the NHS, cuts to youth work, cuts to community services. What we're seeing is the degradation of community services all round, and we're left with the inevitable result of education needing to pick up the slack." That, Presiding Officer, is why we have to take a broader view of this. It's also why we support the findings in closing of the committee that suggested we need to look at the design of buildings, accessible and welcoming environments, so that we can make school buildings accessible and welcoming. And we believe that that includes classroom design, as well as the availability of single-sex, accessible, gender-neutral and changing places toilets, because no one can learn if they can't access a private, safe or accessible toilet. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. Apologies, we do have no time in hand, I'm afraid. I call now Ross Greer, up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The challenge of violence in our schools is a very real one. One of my frustrations, though, with how this debate's developed over the last couple of years is that young people are almost always only spoken about as either the victims or the perpetrators of that violence, and we so rarely talk to young people as opposed to talking about them. We need to recognise that young people are absolutely key to the solutions to this. And as we heard from members of Scotland's Youth Parliament this morning, they want to talk about the core reasons behind the rise in violence in our schools. The vast majority of pupils are well behaved the vast majority of the time. Recent reports have confirmed that. And all staff and pupils deserve to be safe at school. And our schools are certainly not all unsafe all of the time. But this issue is a very real one. I'm sure like most members do. I know teachers who have been injured in the workplace throughout their career, but certainly far more so, more frequently, in some cases more severely, in the post-pandemic period. And like the last time we debated this, the one aspect of this that I want to focus on is violence against women and girls in schools. And I raise it again because of my frustration at what I see as the lack of urgency in tackling that specifically. The Zero Tolerance report from 2 years ago showed that 1 in 5 young women and girls feel unsafe at school in Scotland. 2 in 3 have been sexually harassed. And in large part that's because boys and young men just don't respect girls and women, and in some cases hate them. And I've said before that there is an issue here to be dealt with through the PSE curriculum in our schools. And I raise that because that's an issue that I've worked on throughout the 9 years that I've been a member of this Parliament. We recognised that problem 9 years ago. In the period of time that it's taken us to even get this far, and we're nowhere near done with it, the issue has only got worse. The manosphere did not exist 9 years ago. Andrew Tate was not an influencer 9 years ago. And I'll address the specific points of social media later on. But I do want to talk about the issue that at the moment, the guidance for teaching sexual education in our schools makes one passing reference to the principle of consent. Just one. And that guidance is from 2014. It's not decades old. We've had, for I think 3 years now, a new draft set of guidance on how to deliver sex education in schools that starts off with what our committee called for some years ago, a substantial section on the principle of consent and the importance of respect in relationships and respect for women and girls in particular. That draft guidance has been sat there as a draft for years now, and I'm frustrated with the lack of progress. I'm pleased, though, that yesterday I received an answer from the Cabinet Secretary to a written question saying that following the consultation that took place, we will finally now get a finalised copy of that guidance in the coming weeks. I think that's important because the new guidance starts with that substantial section on consent, and it is also inclusive of LGBTQ young people, because we know that queer young people are disproportionately victims of violence in school. Age and stage appropriate guidance for boys and young men on the importance of respect and healthy relationships is absolutely essential if we are to tackle this. And I want to talk about this again, though, and it is the issue that I bring up every time when we debate this, because of my frustration that it has taken a decade just to change that one guidance document. We talk a lot about tackling violence against women and girls in this Parliament, but can we seriously say that we are making progress, that we're proud of the progress that we've made, when it has taken a decade just to change one guidance document on one element of education to actually talk in any level of depth about the importance of a basic principle like consent? And members of the Scottish Youth Parliament confirmed that this morning. PSE in our schools is supposed to be co-designed by young people, specifically because of issues raised with sex and relationships education. That is simply not the case. I'm proud of the areas that we have made progress in. I'm immensely frustrated, Presiding Officer, though, that I'm essentially making the same speech that I make in every one of these debates, because for 9 years now we've failed to get to grips with what I see as one of the smallest, the lowest hanging fruit, the easiest areas in which we could actually make a difference here.
Thank you. I now call Willie Rennie. Up to 4 minutes, Mr Rennie.
It's too early to judge whether the Scottish Government's action plan is working, as we've not even got through the first phase of the plan. But I think what we can say is that I've not seen any evidence that the action plan is making a practical difference on the ground so far. I continue to receive reports from parents who are frustrated, they feel powerless, they're angry, from pupils whose education is disrupted, but also from teachers who are really frustrated about the lack of support. So we must start to see action in this area, or people will lose confidence in the ability of this plan to deliver. But I want to make some observations. As a Liberal, I always want to understand the root causes of any behaviour and provide support to address those causes. It's why I'm a Liberal. But I want to be clear about this. Just because we understand the causes doesn't make the violence any more acceptable. There must be consequences for that behaviour, because endless understanding without consequences, support and action doesn't help the perpetrator, let alone the victim of that behaviour. And often I do get the impression that some make excuses for those engaging in violence rather than taking the necessary action and providing the support. My second observation is that teachers need to be empowered, supported and respected. When they are unreasonably challenged by parents, they must have the support of their management. Questioning by management of teachers in circumstances is fair. It's the right thing to do. But they must have the backs of teachers when it becomes an issue of behaviour in the class itself. And I hear too many occasions where the teachers do not bother the following time because when they are challenged, they don't get the support that is necessary. Moving on to mobile phones. The evidence of a ban on phones in schools, I think, is pretty convincing. They are contributing, I think, to disorder and disruption in the class, and they can be misused in many occasions. And I think once we're confident that learning and safety won't suffer, and those are two important aspects, we should move, I think, towards a nationwide ban. If the Education Secretary needs that power, we should give her that power to do so. Because I think while it's fair that the Education Secretary is given the power to heads, it's clearly not enough, because they need to have the support from the centre to be able to deliver something in many occasions will be quite controversial. Now, if I conclude on the final point, which was an issue that was raised in the Education Committee last week, that's the issue of part-time timetables for certain pupils. We heard that some are getting as little as 15 minutes a week. Now, sometimes that's because it's in the interest of the pupil, and that's fine. Sometimes you get the impression that it's only in the interest of the school that they get 15 minutes. And on other occasions, you get the impression that it's 15 minutes because that ticks the box when it comes to keeping the promise, because we shouldn't have any care experienced young people being excluded from school. Now, the experiences will vary from pupil to pupil, from school to school. But the people that gave evidence to the committee last week gave us the clear evidence that in many occasions is not actually being appropriately implemented. So I want to make sure that if there is just 15 minutes, the rest of their week is populated with support and action, and they move as in a transitional way back to the school. That's important.
Thank you, Mr Rennie. We now move to the open debate. I call first Pam Gossel to be followed by Bill Kidd. Up to 4 minutes. Ms Gossel.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I am very grateful to be able to speak in this debate on such an important issue. Violent and disruptive behaviour in Scotland's schools has become an epidemic. In 2023 alone, school staff reported almost 45,000 instances of violence and abuse, with 200 staff being physically or verbally abused every day. Another survey found that 70% of Scottish pupils experience sexual harassment, with 34% experiencing unwanted touching. Think of that for a moment. That is 1 in 3 pupils being touched against their will. 7 in 10 experiencing harassment of some kind. And a physical or verbal assault against staff taking place every 2 minutes of a school day. The violence in Scotland's schools is out of control. The SNP need to do far more to help teachers tackle this growing crisis, and my colleague Miles Briggs has already set out some of the actions they must take. But I want to focus today on the impact this violence is having on young girls, because we know that the vast majority of pupils experiencing sexual harassment are girls. We know that 20% of girls no longer feel safe at school, and that for half of those, they say their fear is holding them back from their education. Last month, I held a roundtable on the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. One of the guests was a teacher who recounted some of the shocking incidents that took place at her school. She described boys having a group chat where they rated girls and photoshopped their heads onto fake bodies. And most appalling, she said the boys took advantage of unisex toilets to sneak their phones under the stalls and film girls. Sadly, this is not the first time such an incident has happened. Recently, a hidden camera which filmed hundreds of naked girls were found in a unisex toilet stall in a Dundee school. However, when the teacher I spoke to raised concerns about the mixed-sex toilets, she was branded transphobic. Raising concerns over girls facing sexual harassment in mixed-sex toilets is not transphobic. It's common sense. It's a bare minimum safeguarding young girls deserve. Yet 1 in 20 schools in Scotland currently offer only mixed-sex facilities with no single-sex toilets at all. It's no wonder so many girls feel unsafe at school, when even toilets and changing rooms are no longer safe spaces. That is why it's vital that single-sex facilities are available in every school. The SNP must do more to support teachers to tackle sexual harassment and violence. This includes empowering teachers to discipline violent pupils, putting an end to the terror many girls live under. Schools should be environments where pupils feel safe and enjoy their childhood. Unfortunately, that is not the case in Scotland under the SNP government. A generation of children are having their education disrupted, while a generation of girls are learning to fear sexual harassment every day. Talking shop will no longer cut it. We need real action to tackle this crisis.
Thank you. I now call Bill Kidd to be followed by Alec Rowley. Up to 4 minutes. Mr Kidd.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I welcome the opportunity to speak in today's important debate here in the Chamber. I'm sure we all agree that having a safe place, and I know we do all agree, having a safe place for young people to learn and our teachers to teach is central to a successful educational system. I also see from the various amendments that we share the same concerns over reported cases of violence against pupils and staff, as well as disruption in schools. The violence and abusive behaviour in schools is completely unacceptable, and the various amendments also welcome the publication of the Joint National Action Plan with COSLA, which sets out the actions which should be taken over the next 3 years in response to the evidence from the Behaviour in Scottish Schools Research 2023. The Action Plan states that the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child and Corporation Scotland Act 2024 places duties on public authorities which include taking into account the views of the child or young person affected. And therefore, children and young people should play an integral role in shaping the local policies and relationships and behaviour that will affect them. This is a crucial point, and one which I feel could be more prominent both today and in our overall discussions with regards to education and children's participation within these. While working alongside organisations like Education Scotland and local authorities is important for implementing the plan, we should ensure, I think, that we genuinely listen to the pupils themselves. They are the ones who experience daily disruption in the classroom, and it is their input that will guide us in creating the safest and most conducive learning environment for both students and teachers. By involving pupils in the process of shaping their educational experiences, we empower them to become co-creators of their learning journey. This approach not only fosters greater engagement, but also challenges the traditional power dynamics that often, leave students' needs and views overlooked. When pupils feel that their opinions are valued and taken seriously, they are more likely to feel respected and, as a result, less inclined to act out in the classroom. This shift towards a more inclusive and respectful environment is essential for creating a school culture where both students and teachers can thrive, where learning is not only safe but meaningful and effective. Indeed, one of the main points of discussion to come out of the recent education bill at stage 1 was this very issue, namely ensuring that essential to any educational reform is safety, including, hopefully, implementation of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, we are to build an environment that is to be safe for pupils and teachers. We need to involve those who will be using that environment. As such, should the Government be minded to bring forward an update on how these actions are being taken forward, as called for in Mr Briggs' motion, then I ask them to please ensure that UNCRC Article 12, which states that when adults are making decisions that affect children, they should ask the children what they think, and that should help to take centre stage. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call Alec Rowley to be followed by what we call up to 4 minutes. Mr Rowley.
Presiding Officer, I've always believed that the greatest gift that any society can give a child is access to a good quality education where they can achieve and have the opportunity to achieve their full potential. Sadly, in Scotland right now, for too many children, that's not happening. That's not the case. And when I speak to parents, pupils, teachers, school staff, they all say to me, why can't the politicians in this place and the politicians in councils come together and work together to try and resolve the issues that are there? And I think that's where people are at. We know there's problems, we know there are serious issues, and we need to find a way to come together to find the solutions, working with schools, working with teachers, working with the local authorities. And I was disappointed, therefore, in the speech that the Minister actually just made, where she was warning us about using youth violence as a political football. None of us in here would be doing our job if we did not come here and raise these issues. That's why I'm grateful to the Conservative Party for giving 4 minutes or for giving part of their business today. I would ask the Education Secretary to look at further debates and government time in here to start to look at these issues and look at how we're going to actually work together to tackle some of these issues. In fairness to the Education Secretary, I think she has always been more than willing to acknowledge that there are serious challenges in our schools. Indeed, I read in the Courier newspaper this week a report of a public meeting that took place that I believe the Education Secretary was at Glenrothes. And I have a host of quotes here for teachers, for parents that highlight some of the very serious problems that are being faced in our schools. So I would suggest to the Minister not to put her head in the sand, and actually the starting point has to be to acknowledge the problems that we have and start to look at how we're going to tackle them. Interestingly, I take the point that Bill Kidd mentioned there about involvement in schools. I had the pleasure this morning to meet in Parliament a P7 class from Flynn Primary School. And I told them about this debate that was going to be taking place this afternoon, and the fact that one of the issues is the government has issued guidance on the use of phones in schools, but there are many that would lean towards a total ban. And that would be part of the discussion, and I explained the procedures for how that would happen. That generated more discussion, I think, than I've ever had when I meet with school children, and up went the hands. And I have to say the majority of the primary 7 pupils did not want to see a ban. They demanded to know what my view on it was, and I told them that I was leaning towards a ban, but I was, of course, going to listen to them. But if you take Flynn Primary School, they have a policy in place where you hand your phone in, you get it back at lunchtime, and you hand it back in again. I was informed that a high school in Stirling has banned phones completely. So all I would say to the Minister, to the Cabinet Secretary, is we need to look at how that's going. We need to look at how it's working. But I would, in my final seconds, actually say we need more additional support teachers in schools. We need more assistant support teachers in school, more learning support teachers. That's what the education establishment, that's what teachers, that's what schools are telling us. So, good, we're making some progress, but we clearly have problems, and I would urge that we need more resources, more teachers, more learning support teachers, and that's the way to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Rowley. I now call Ros McCall to be followed by George Adam. Up to 4 minutes. Ms McCall.
We've heard the concerns over violence in our schools, and that does include primary. Physical and verbal abuse is an issue in primary as it is in secondary. And mobile phones are not just a teenage problem, as we've just heard, with 62% of 8-year-olds owning one. Giving younger children the same access to negative influences and developmental anxieties, just like the same as their counterparts.
I wonder if the member would take an intervention.
Yeah, a quick one.
Briefly, Edward Mountain.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and thank the member for taking an intervention. In 2023-24, there were 3,170 incidents of violence in Highland schools. That's a 548% increase in 4 years. That's an incident 16 incidents every day. Does the member believe that teachers want action, not more task force?
Ros McCall.
Yeah. Thank you, and yes. Let children be children. They should be growing up in a state of innocence. It's called childlike innocence for a reason. For many children in Scotland, that's not the case. They're burdened by pressures that their young minds can't comprehend, and schools should be a glorious respite from that. Give a child the time and the space for their minds to develop in a safe, psychologically sensitive way, and they'll cope far better in later years with the trials of life. But that space varies greatly depending on what part of the country you live in. Families across Scotland are faced with a postcode lottery when it comes to accessing the 1140 hours of funded childcare, regardless of what the Minister's comments were earlier. Funding issues for local authorities mean that some are offering funded childcare immediately following a child's third birthday, some a month later than the third birthday, some are delayed into the following school term. Some local authorities take children that come from a different council area because parents work nearby, and some refuse. There is a disparity in the offer, and it is adversely affecting working parents and subsequently their children. Now, I was given advice when I became a mum. It's your job to ensure that they're never put in a situation they can't handle. But unfortunately, we do that every day. There is not a single girl that attended school with my daughters that didn't have a negative reaction to Primary 2 food and nutrition. Food became bad, and the fear of a note coming home from the teacher for insignificant vegetable content was almost palpable. Every 7-year-old I met at that time became worried about what they ate. Food was no longer fuel to be run off at playtime, but a source of anxiety. And now we've just expanded food guidance to nurseries, where birthday cakes are a thing of the past, and unintended consequences are that even younger children will be made to be worried about what they eat. And equally, we're starting to force sexualisation on children. Children are children. Young boys playing with dolls and wearing pink frilly dresses is absolutely normal, just as girls climbing trees and building bridges. Their imagination is firing and limits don't apply, and nor should they. It is therefore deeply concerning that groups like LGBT youth are infiltrating our primary schools. I checked LBGT's youth website this morning, and they proudly state that they are Scotland's national charity for LGBTQ+ young people aged 13 to 25. Now, I'm all for support in that age range when it comes to sexual issues and worries, and I might question the concerns now surrounding this particular group. But we don't have 13 to 25-year-olds in primary schools. Experts are warning of lasting psychological danger to introducing young children to material from trans ideology. The former Scottish Government advisor, educational psychologist Carolyn Brown, said, "Children struggle with their bodies during puberty. Without harmful ideology influences, they grow on to be who they're meant to be. LGBT Youth Scotland believe those struggling with puberty are born in the wrong body, and this causes lasting psychological harm, sending children down an inevitable road of medication and surgery. Primary school is not the right place, and nor is it the right time for children to be worried about this. It's time to let children be children."
Thank you. I now call George Adam to be followed by Ash Regan. Up to 4 minutes. Mr Adam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, as I normally do in these debates, I looked at the opposition's motion when I first saw it, and normally you try and find something. Normally an opposition motion would be pretty tight, an issue, a specific issue. This one's just about everything, so I'm not moaning about it. It gives me the opportunity to talk about anything I want to talk about within the educational environment. But one of the things that I do want to talk about is the fact that I accept that it's challenging for teachers and for pupils and for those in the school environment. To a certain degree, it has always been thus. I remember it like that when I was younger, and that wasn't yesterday. But on the whole, when I go out to schools in my constituency in Paisley, it's not what I experience. An example of a visit recently was I went along to a school to see an anti-alcohol play that was getting done for them. Don't use alcohol, kids. It was for first years. And because of the relationship I had with the school, I was asked to go to the Modern Studies class and talk to them about something. And we spoke about, in fact, they helped me with a speech that I made in Parliament the next day. And apparently one of them was bragging that I used one of their lines at one point when we were talking about it. But these are the things that when the MSYPs were in Parliament today at the Education Committee, these are the issues they were talking about, is how we engage with them, how the educational authorities engage with them as well. It's not just the case of young people, because these MSYPs today were almost offended when Miles Briggs brought up the question of violence in schools, because they felt they were getting the blame. Young people were getting the blame of the whole kind of scenario. And that's one of the things that you've got to be careful of in a debate like this, because they're wanting us to engage with them. They want to talk about how the educational environment can be better for them, how we can work together to make that better as well. And one of the questions I asked when we were having this discussion was, and it's when they actually became quite, they lit up with the whole debate, was the fact when I asked about social media and the pressure on them with social media. Now, if you take, so I can understand why we could talk about schools and banning mobile phones, but when they become a distraction and when they become a problem in the school place, I think the Scottish Government has done their bit to make sure and empower head teachers to ensure that they have the power to take these phones away. But there's also a balance to be struck as well, because one of the young women that was at the committee today mentioned that I've got a health condition. So therefore, with my health condition, if I haven't got access to my phone, that can become a bit of a problem. So, you know, we need to be more flexible and we need to actually discuss this issue with a wee bit of maturity and not just stick there at our political lines and kind of shout at each other from various parts of the chamber. But social media in particular was the one that they said, the pressure that's created by social media, the chances that they kind of feel that they're kind of pushed. Some of them may be triggered when they're in class or in school because of something that's been said on social media. But the big thing for them was the societal issues. The behaviour changes were made because of societal issues. And they said they were willing to work with every one of us to try and make that difference in our society. So what I saw today was young people willing to engage with the political process to try and make that difference. And I think we need to be very, very careful when we actually highlight these things and we kind of highlight individuals of young people are the problem, they're creating all the violence, there's an issue there. We have to be very careful when we do that. Now, I believe, in closing, Presiding Officer, I acknowledge that our teachers need to work in a safe environment, and I acknowledge they work in a challenging environment. And I know that we have to have a safe environment for our young people, but all we have to do is ensure that everyone sits down in sobriety and has that conversation, that we can actually make that difference and change things. And that, for me, is the whole point of this debate, not the yaboo politics from some.
Thank you. And I call the final speaker in the open debate, Ash Regan, up to 2 minutes, please.
Our schools must be places where our children can thrive and our teachers can also excel. Yet too many classrooms are undermined by disruption, sometimes even by violence. And I fear they are lacking that clear, decisive policy that is backed up by strong leadership. The well-being of pupils and teachers alike is sometimes at risk, and that must change. So strong leadership begins here with all of us in this Parliament. I think that is a theme that has developed over this debate this afternoon, where we take responsibility for the safety and the success of our schools, because schools are our children's first independent communities, teaching them things about respect, about conflict management and about the shared values that underpin our society. Yet, I feel that many schools have been left ill-equipped to address the challenges that they are now facing that have been exacerbated by the pandemic. And I must be very clear here with the Government that empowering head teachers without providing a robust national support to underpin that, it's not leadership, I'm sorry to say, it is passing the buck. So we have to ensure that our schools have got clear policies, that they've got clear protection, and we're enforcing consistent behavioural standards. And mobile phones are rightly being discussed this afternoon. They clearly are having an impact on our young people's mental health, and we need to focus more on that. You know, smoking, drugs, alcohol, we know that they cause harm. I believe we're approaching the point now where we understand that mobile phones and social media use, or overuse, I should say, is also harmful to our young people and to their mental health. So we didn't leave the smoking ban up to the discretion of venue managers. So we shouldn't leave the issue of mobile phones in classrooms up to individual schools. In my opinion, a nationwide ban is now necessary. It should be brought forward as quickly as possible to safeguard the learning and well-being of our children. I think government does need to step up here, and I'm very sorry to say that the government suggestion of a task force is just not going to cut it.
Thank you. We now move to closing speeches. I call first Ross Greer, up to 4 minutes. Mr Greer.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I want to, in closing, just round off the point I was making around the importance of personal and social education in tackling violence against women and girls, and that final point I made around the importance of co-design by young people themselves. I think this is absolutely essential, and teachers have given us very clear feedback that this is what they need. Because in many cases, teachers aren't on the same social media platforms as their pupils, and if they are, the algorithm is showing them something completely different. They are simply not aware of what particularly young men and boys are seeing online. And most PSE is not delivered by subject specialists. I don't think it's fair for us to expect a geography teacher or a biology teacher who's trying to keep on top of their own specialism to also keep on top of areas like the developments with the manosphere and that new wave of misogyny. And young people want to help solve this. We heard that in the Education Committee this morning. If areas like sex and relationship education, PSE overall, are co-designed by young people, they can be kept up to date with the challenges that young people are facing. That has so often been the issue with this part of the curriculum, is it becomes outdated very quickly, and teachers in classrooms simply do not have the time themselves to keep on top of that. I think we do also need to seriously consider subject specialism in this area. There are a few schools in Scotland that deliver PSE through subject specialists as opposed to teachers from other areas taking a period a day or a couple of periods a week to deliver PSE. And Bill Kidd, I thought, got it absolutely right when he said that pupils feel more respected when their views are taken on board. They feel more like they're part of the school community. Better learning is a result of that, of co-design, better behaviour, and it's better for staff as well. I think Edward Mountain made an important point in highlighting the rise in incidents of violence in schools in the Highlands. I think it was a 500% increase that he mentioned. So I think that is in large part a real increase. I think it's also in part an increase in reporting of a level of violence that was always there, but was going under-reported or misreported. Parliament has taken evidence before of schools wanting to protect their reputation, so not accurately recording these incidents. The school didn't want a reputation for having a problem with, for example, misogyny. So it just puts it down as a generic incident of difficult pupil behaviour, which makes it harder for us to get a grip with. And that's still a lingering issue. Reporting has improved, but is not entirely resolved. I do want to talk about one positive, one area that I do think we've made progress, and that's with offering mental health support and counselling in schools. While the challenges with CAMHS certainly have not been tackled, we have seen a significant increase in access to mental health support for young people in school. In the 6 monthly reporting periods that we get, there were 10,000 young people accessing it, then 12, then 14. That is meeting a level of demand that was always there, and it would be wrong to suggest that all instances of violence in schools are simply because of mental ill health, but there is clearly a link between those two, and that support is absolutely essential. Very briefly, in closing, on the issue of phones in schools, I would absolutely be in favour of an outright ban in classrooms. I'm very uncomfortable with the idea of a complete ban in school grounds because of the issues that some members have mentioned before, particularly because of the simple challenge of a lot of young people having a phone in part, particularly at a younger age, as part of their safety when they're getting to and from school. The challenge, if it's banned from school grounds, is in practice that then prevents them from having it on that journey as well. And on social media, yes, social media does cause harm to young people. It causes harm to people of all ages. The people most likely to fall for misinformation and conspiracy theories are not sitting in school. They are far older than that, and we as adults need to face up to that. But there are also positives for young people from social media, particularly isolated young people who find community that they wouldn't otherwise have found. I know that experience for a lot of LGBT young people in particular, Presiding Officer. So all I would say in closing is that what's essential here is that we build community, we create belonging. Young people deserve that, and they will respond with respect to that.
Thank you. We have no time in hand. Martin Whitfield, up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I hear your suggestion. I would draw attention to my register of interests as a former teacher. I think this has been a fascinating debate. I had the beautifully prepared speech, but I want to move away from that because I think what we've heard this afternoon, and I think George Adam highlighted it at the opening of his contribution when he talked about the very wide motion that allowed people to speak about anything in relation to education, and I think people have. But I think there is an importance in that, because I think what we've heard this afternoon is that this is a nuanced debate of which there are a lot of causes, there are some solutions, and there are still a lot of questions that need to be answered, in particular in relation to the data. I think we've heard evidence here in this debate this afternoon that there are cases where schools and indeed individual teachers, for a variety of reasons, and some of them, I would suggest with merit, have chosen not to report violent acts or to report it in a different way to try and preserve others' reputation. And I think one of the calls in the motion for a better discussion about what data and how the data is collected is important, although I am concerned about kicking it down the road to another task force, because I think we do know what the data is. I think the challenge is how the government can collect that data and how we can ensure that the data is robust. I was very impacted by Ros McCall's contribution when she talked about the importance of childhood, because I think one of the things that gets missed, and this speaks to the concern that Ross Greer posed about children being blamed for the violence, is there a loss of childhood now? Because the childhood that our young people are going through is very different from the childhood that almost everybody sitting in this chamber went through. And I think it speaks when we talk about the algorithms that show us things on our social media is very different from the algorithms that are shown to our young people. And who is looking at that to capture that data? Who is seeing, who is getting under the bonnet to see what our young people are being exposed to? I'm very pleased that so many members from Pam Gosal, Pam Duncan-Glancy, Ros Greer raised the question of violence against women and girls, because I think the situation is now at a point that this is not just about violence in schools. It is violence that's being predicated towards certain groups deliberately and is being stirred up, and it needs to be addressed. And there have been some solutions that have been put forward, but much, much more work needs to be done. In the short time that I have, I do want to capture an important element that was raised by Bill Kidd, which is Article 12 and Article 13 of the United Nations Conventions on the Rights of the Child. And sitting within that is one of the solutions that I think this government could take much further, and indeed others in elected bodies at local authorities and within schools can take much further, and that is involving our children and young people in what the solutions are. It's not necessary for them just to be there when the decisions are made or the talks that are made. It's not necessary for that just to be seen as a one-off. Because if we involve our children and young people in the solutions, they can express the experiences they're having. They can tell us what it is like, and they can also suggest the answers to these. It may answer the hands up that I don't want my phone taken off me by the P7s to the maybe you should think about it, because the journey of that discussion will enlighten the young people. It will be the pedagogy. It will be being with them when they learn something. So the UNCRC is there for a very good reason. And I would like to finish just with a very short quote from the Children and Young People's Commissioner, that children and young people are yet to feel the change that we've talked about here. For some children, if reform is not urgent, they will be denied their right to an education, and that develops them to what we hope is their fullest potential for their entire school experience. I'm grateful, Deputy Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. And I call Jenny Goldruth, Cabinet Secretary, up to 5 minutes, please.
Presiding Officer, apologies that I had to leave the chamber very briefly before the summing up speeches, during the summing up speeches. I thank the Conservative Party for using some of their time this afternoon to devote to wellbeing in Scotland's schools and behaviour in particular. And I think the breadth of issues that we've covered, certainly in the motion, but also I should acknowledge in the amendments, including the government's, mean we haven't been able to fully do this topic justice this afternoon. However, subject to parliamentary agreement, there will be a full debate in government time on the impact of poverty in our classrooms in the coming weeks, so I look forward to that as another opportunity to perhaps talk to some of these issues in more detail, because I think it's been a hugely important debate this afternoon. I want to touch on a number of points that have been made by members, and I'm conscious, Presiding Officer, that time is short. Miles Briggs is absolutely right to say that our schools have changed post-pandemic, and part of the change that we have seen in our schools has informed changed behaviours. I was very pleased to hear that he attended his local EIS event last night, and as he heard from Mr Rowley during the course of the debate, I attended my own in Glenrothes last Thursday. And I listened to the views of mums and dads, carers and EIS members, and they were very clear about the need for more resource, more staff, more investment. And of course, that's why the government's draft budget has proposed an additional £41 million to support teacher numbers and £29 million for additional support needs as extra investment into our schools. Now, Miles Briggs spoke to there being no data on changed behaviour patterns post-COVID, which somewhat negates the publication of the Behaviour in Scotland Schools research, the BISSA research, which published in November 2023 and looks at data from nearly 4,000 staff from across the country. There are other data sets, of course, you could consider, including the survey of more than 8,000 children carried out by HMIE, which looked at bullying in our schools. I want to come on now to talk to Ms Duncan-Glancy's points, a number of which were very relevant and pertinent, I think, to some of the issues we're discussing today, particularly reduced class contact. And it may please the member to know that I met with the teaching trade unions on this matter just yesterday, and of course they have a requirement for the Government, working with local authorities, to table a suggestion to move forward on that meaningful progress, which was part of the deal with local government that we struck ahead of the budget, and that will be done in advance of the 3rd of February deadline that they have set. And I very much welcome the trade unions' engagement on that matter, because reducing class contact, reducing teacher workload is part of the solution to some of the challenge we've talked to today. She also spoke rightly to the worrying increase in misogyny in recent years, and we see that borne out by the evidence from trade unions themselves, but also by our research in terms of BISR. And I'm very grateful to the member's suggestion in relation to the Mind Your Time web resource. That resource, of course, was funded by the Scottish Government, with £170,000 of support going directly to the Scottish Youth Parliament. So I'm glad that she has welcomed that investment from the Government. Ross Greer, of course, also spoke about women and girls' experience of sex education, and I think he's right to raise consent as an issue. The update to RSHP guidance has taken too long, I accept that, but I'm glad that we will shortly be able to publish that update as confirmed to him only yesterday. I also would agree with Mr Rennie. He talks about the National Action Plan and it being too early to judge whether or not that's had an influence, but I do want to put on the record, as I think the Government's amendment makes very clear, that that National Action Plan will provide the Parliament with an update in March and will set out a range of measures that have been taken forward. He also is right to say that understanding these cases individually should not necessarily negate consequences in terms of adverse behaviour in our schools. I would agree with him on that point. We have discussed at length in the Chamber over the course of the last year consequences in our schools. And it is the case today that young people will face consequences in their school. However, that depends upon the behaviour management policy that exists. So when he talks to the importance here of school management, I very much agree with him in supporting staff in how those behaviour management policies are taken forward. But that's also why the National Action Plan is so crucial, to my mind, to driving more consistency across the country in terms of how schools advocate for policies and actually enact the consequences that we've talked to today. Bill Kidd spoke to the need to listen to pupils themselves, and he is absolutely right on that point. I know a variety of members in here have expressed views on mobile phones, and as I'm sure all MSPs will be aware of, the national guidance which published on this and was broadly welcomed last August. And Mr Rennie is also correct to say that I do not have the power as Education Secretary to enforce a national ban, but the national guidance goes as far as I am able to in setting out our expectations and empowering head teachers to ban. And I should say, Presiding Officer, not all head teachers in Scotland want a full ban. I would encourage members to engage with their head teachers locally, to talk to them. When I launched the guidance, I went to Stonelaw Academy, for example, and spoke to the head teacher there about the process they'd undertaken. They got their young people to mine their data, to look at the way in which they interacted with their screen time, for example. They got buy-in from parents, buy-in from the community. That took time. So it's not a simple step, and I think we need to be mindful that there are other consequences of having a national ban. Somebody mentioned health needs, for example, Presiding Officer, which we also address in the update in terms of the National Action Plan on mobile phones. Presiding Officer, I'm very conscious of time, but as I said to Parliament back in September, there are unlikely to be quick, easy fixes to addressing the challenges in our schools post-pandemic, but we all need to work together to that end, recognising this has to be a shared spirit of partnership. Presiding Officer, I will close.
Thank you very much indeed, Cabinet Secretary. I now invite Douglas Ross to wind up the debate. Up to 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I think we've had an excellent debate today, and it was led by Miles Briggs, who covered a range of issues, but I think outlining the concerns he heard with his EIS members last night replicates what each and every one of us hears from parents and staff up and down the country. Just last month, I met with 2 teaching assistants in Murray who explained that they love their job, but they are facing hugely challenging and difficult circumstances in the classroom every single day, and they wonder about their future in that profession. And it goes to the point that Willie Rennie made in his speech about support from management, because one of the concerns they came to speak to me about is they felt their head teacher didn't do enough to support them. If a pupil needed to be removed from the classroom, if a pupil needed more support, head teachers are now, and I'm not saying this across the board, but there are some examples of head teachers that don't take the action needed to support their staff in the classroom. And I think that comes to Alec Rowley's point that we need more support staff in our classrooms. But is it an attractive opportunity for people to come into the classrooms to do a difficult job if they're not getting the support to do that? So I think these 2 issues that Willie Rennie and Alex Rowley raised are important and are linked to some of the problems we're facing at the moment. I thought in an excellent contribution, Pam Goso mentioned that every 2 minutes in the school day, a teacher suffers physical or verbal abuse. Every 2 minutes. And again, that's not just in the areas that have been articulated today. In my own area of Murray, we did a Freedom of Information request, and the figures of the increase in physical and verbal assaults on staff are shocking. In primary schools, we have seen a more than trebling in the last 4 years of physical and verbal assaults. In secondary schools, 7.5 times more physical and verbal assaults in the last year than 4 years previously. So in 2020 to 2021, there were just under 700 in Murray primary schools, physical and verbal assaults. In 2023-2024, it was almost 2,500. That is a huge increase, which does raise questions about what is happening in our schools and the guidance that is being put out by the Scottish Government, because clearly this situation is not getting any better, it is getting worse. And particularly concerning was the number of physical assaults using a weapon. In 2020-2021, the figure for secondary schools in Murray was 1. And I strongly believe that that is 1 too many. But then it went up to 5. And to 6, and in 2023-2024, physical assaults with a weapon recorded in Murray is now up into double figures of 11. These are weapons being taken into our schools and used against pupils, staff and others, and it is something we have to get a grip of. And that comes to the government response today. And I have to say, the Minister wasn't very happy that she heard groans from the Conservative benches when she mentioned a task force. Well, I'm sorry, that is the reaction. And if the Minister and the Cabinet Secretary think that somehow in staff rooms up and down the country, teachers are going to be celebrating and punching the air because the Government have announced another task force, then I think they are completely wrong. And I will give way to the Minister in a moment. And I'll give way if she can answer this question. The Minister came here saying she has been instructed to announce the commencement of a task force. Does the Minister or the Education Secretary know how many task force, advisory groups and working groups are currently listed on the Scottish Government website?
Minister. I'm not aware if the member and the rest of the Conservative benches were listening. The task force is in relation to child protection online and harmful abuse online. It is not in relation to violence in schools. I did advise that the Cabinet Secretary would be speaking to the Actions for Schools. So actually I think this is a really positive move, and anything that's going to help protect our children and young people from online harms should be welcomed.
Douglas Ross.
It is welcome, but the answer to my question was 302. 302 task force, working groups, advisory groups set up by this SNP government. It's now 303. That's what they reach for every time there's a problem. They think it can be solved by setting up another task force to listen more, to do more, but it doesn't have the actions. Just listen to the figures we've heard today about the shocking rise in assaults for our teachers, for fellow pupils. This is not working. I'm not sure what that means when the Minister's going like that to me, but this issue is not being dealt with properly. We are not getting to the core of the problem, and another task force is not going to do it. We have not had much time today, Deputy Presiding Officer, and that has been mentioned, and I welcome the fact that the Cabinet Secretary is going to bring a debate in government time. But we've asked for that before now. Yet again, it's another Conservative-led Opposition Day debate where we are raising education issues. And we will listen and we will contribute to the debate that the Cabinet Secretary brings to this chamber, because it is of huge importance to people up and down the country. I thought actually the chamber behind the Cabinet Secretary would have been fuller today for this debate, because it is so crucial. There are so many issues that we need to focus on, and that's why the motion from Miles Briggs was very wide-ranging, because there are so many issues in our education system right now. We were told education would be the #1 priority for this SNP government, and I have never seen that, not once in their 18 years in government, where education has truly been the #1 priority, and I think that's why our young people are suffering at the moment, and our teachers and our support staff are struggling as well. I want, however, to give the final word to Ros McCall, who I thought gave an excellent speech today, and she finished with the words, "It is absolutely crucial that we let children be children." As a parent and a politician, I could not agree more. And by supporting common-sense Scottish Conservative policies, we can improve the opportunities for our children, let children be children, and give them the chance to thrive in Scotland, as we would all like. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Ross. That concludes the debate, and there will be a very short pause before we move on to the next item of business. Thank you.